I look around and I do research and I study, I think a lot of the health philosophies that people have are really just imaginary, in that they just exist literally in their head, in their imagination, and in some far-off fantasy world. And as a corollary to that, I think it's really based on this whole hippie redneckism, or being kind of an intellectual hillbilly. And I'll explain both of those things in just a second. So usually the train of thought follows that we should or shouldn't do something depending on, what our ancestors would have done, or what would, if we lived in nature as like a wild animal or something, what we would and wouldn't have access to. And most people, or not most people, I'm sorry, a lot of people I see are using that for the basis of their whole health philosophy. And to me, it's just, I've been there, I went through that, because there's a certain degree of it that just kind of makes sense and is kind of obvious. But that's just a small piece of the pie, and the majority of it is pretty, non-common sense, non-logical, and just kind of laughable in a way. And it's very much this whole hippie redneckism thing, because when you think of like an old school redneck, what do? They sit on their front porch in the rocking chair and they talk about the good old days, and before things went to the shitter because this new generation's ruining everything. And I remember the good old days when things were like this and they weren't like this. That's basically very similar to this whole idea of, the good old days back when we were this, hunter-gatherer, when we were this, living in nature, when our ancestors were this way. Because of this, we should now do this. In reality, those two philosophies are very similar and hold a lot of the same foundations, and they're both pretty flawed. Now, they both may have some validity and some value, but I think the ultimate thing is to ask, what makes sense right now? Because we're not living, when our ancestors did. We're not living as a hunter-gatherer. We're not living as a natural animal in nature, and we really don't know what those things are. And in reality, all that we know about those, aside from a little bit of historical data, is really just in our imagination. And then even from the historical data, the majority of that we're drawing from that is just conjecture, assumption, and hypothesis, which again is just living in our emotion or in our imagination, not the actual reality. So we're basing this present moment approach, this present moment decision on something that's just has nothing to do with this present moment. It's something that's literally just in the imagination. So to me, it doesn't really make too much sense. And when you really analyze these things and break them down, the arguments tend to crumble pretty immediately. And I'm not saying these health ideas don't have value and may or may not help people. I'm just bringing up this point and pointing it out and saying that, hey, this idea of because our ancestors did it this way, or because natural animals or whatever do it this way, that's cool. But that has nothing really to do with this present moment situation, living in the year 2010, in the environment that we live in the life that we live in. So ultimately, it seems massively hindered in the results that it's going to be able to deliver. So since we can only focus on a very limited amount of things in any given moment, and we have a limited amount of mental attention in a limited amount of time, I think it would be more valuable to look at the present moment, to look at our present options, our present lifestyle, and see what our best choices are, and see what makes sense based on now, based on what we're doing, what we're facing, and what our goals are. And we should really let go of this whole kind of hippie redneckism of like, the good old days back when things were this way, and now it's all gone to shit because now it's this way, so we have to stick to the old ways. It's like, that's cool if that's what you're into. It's just, it doesn't really make so much sense. It's not very logical. It's not very practical, and it has not too much to do with the present moment.